Welcome to WDS. If you are tired of AI generated slog and want real human telling story, please subscribe to our channel and support it. My name is Maria Tokir and I'll be your narrator. Let's get into the story. Hello everybody, we're back. We are back with the last episode and we'll be continuing from where we have left. There you go. He opened his mouth. She was already turning to go. She came back in the afternoon with a covered pot of the green child stew that she left on the porch without knocking, still warm enough to steam faintly in the cool afternoon air. No note. He found it at the desk and stood looking at for a long moment with the confused expression of a man who has been outside the range of ordinary kindness for so long he has started to find it slightly suspicious. He ate all of it. It was magnificent. She came back the day after that because Kasho had wandered to the edge of her aunt's property. She was staying close by. She said vaguely, while she figured some things out and she wanted to make sure he knew the dog had been ringing. She ended up staying 2 hours, sitting on his porch steps in jeans and work boots with a cup of his coffee. Talking in the easy, unhurried way, she seemed to talk about everything. The name of the specific cloud formation building over the mesa, a corridor she had heard on the radio that she couldn't stop humming. The reason she believed old houses had distinct personalities the way old people did, accumulated and specific and not transferable to anyone else. Ahano sat in his chair. He didn't talk much. He didn't go inside either. She came back the next week and the week after that, not every day. She had her own life to rebuild, her own wreckage to sort through, her own mornings to get through without reaching for her phone to call someone who was no longer the right person to call. But she kept appearing with food, with noise, with the particular and specific chaos she seems to generate naturally in her immediate vicinity, the way certain people are, simply weather systems. She broke the handle of his coffee pot, reaching for it too fast, and replaced it in the next day with a better one. She reorganized his entire tool in the barn without asking and then gave him a detailed explanation of the new system that was infuriatingly much more logical than what he had before. She somehow got her boot stuck in the soft mud beside the water through one afternoon, and after spending 10 minutes trying to extract it with increasing architectural creativity before the boost finally came free with a sound like question mark and sent her stumbling backward into the fence when which she bound off of with a remarkable composure, mud covered, boot held aloft with the trophy. Each time, sometime in the deep locked interior of a Hanno shifted. Not dramatically, not the way story described a heart opening, not like a sunrise, not like a key in a rock, more like the way ice behaves in the very first week of spring. No single moment of melting, just an accumulation of the warmth degree by degree, until one morning you look and something was solid has started quietly to move. The day that door finally opened, happened on the Friday afternoon in the late May. The kitchen window latch had been broken for 2 months. It wouldn't stay closed and banged in the wind, and he had simply lived with the banging the way he had learned to live with everything uncomfortable by becoming so accustomed so to it that he had stopped noticing it was there. Marisol arrival noticed it within the 30-second and announced with complete confidence that she knew exactly how to fix it. Have you fixed the window latches before? Ahano asked. I have fixed all kinds of things, she said, which he would later realize was not technically an answer to the question. He found her a screwdriver. She positioned herself at the window with the focused energy of a woman approaching a problem she's slightly underprepared for, but too committed to admit. The first attempt stripped the old screw slightly. The second attempt caught it. The third attempt saw the screwdriver slip sideways. The old latch ping cleanly off its housing, describe a small arc through the air, and drop with a decisive plink into the half full glass of water sitting on the counter beside the window. Marisol reached for the glass to fish out the latch. In reaching, she caught the edge of the glass with her elbow. The glass tipped. The water went across the counter and over the edge and onto the floor into a generous splash. He stepped back from the water, her sock finding the wettest part of the floor with unerring precision, her foot sliding left while the rest of her went right, her hand shooting out for something to grab and closing around the curtain rod which his Hanno had been meaning to secure properly for approximately 1 year came away from the wall at both ends simultaneously, and the entire thing, rod, rings, curtain, and a Marisol descended to the kitchen floor in one slow, theoretical collapse. Silence. She sat on the floor, completely engulfed in the old cotton curtain fabric, the curtain rod across her lap, the latch somewhere in the fold, her hair fully released from whatever had been holding it. One sock wet, both hands extended slightly as though she had been trying to catch something that has already gotten away. She was still for one full second and then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, not the kind of the laugh designed to manage someone else's discomfort. She laughed the way people laugh when they were absolutely, completely, helplessly defeated by the absurdity of their own situation, from where deep in the belly, enormous and unstoppable and entire without vanity, the full throttled laugh of a woman who had been stood up at her altar, driven a gas can barefoot through the desert in her wedding dress, and had now taken out an innocent kitchen window and his curtain with the focused energy of someone who had been trying to help. It filled the kitchen. It bounced off the timber walls. Hugh lifted his head from his spot by the door with the expression of a dog who has witnessed something unusual and deciding how to feel about. And a Hano running wolf, the man who had not laughed in the 3 years, 2 months, and however many days, the man who had turned himself to the stone against the cold of his own life, the man whose name meant he laughs and who had come to think of that name as a kind of cosmic joke at his expense, felt something in his chest move. A small moment, deep and unfamiliar, like a door, long locked, that someone had finally found the right key for, not by force, not by any deliberate concept attack, but just by being exactly themselves in front of it long enough. He laughed. Not a big laugh, not the laugh of a healed man or a whole man or man who had arrived at the other side of anything. Just a single breath of something real, a short, quiet sound from the actual place inside him, the place that has been locked and cold and silent for over 3 years, and it came out before he could stop it, before he would even recognize what it was. He stood in his kitchen doorway and laughed at Marisol Vega sitting on his floor under his curtain with the curtain rod in her lap and one wet sock and cake frosting still on her left elbow. She looked up at him from under the curtain. She stopped laughing. She looked at him the way you looked at something rare and fragile that has just revealed itself unexpectedly, with complete attention, with no moment, with the particular stillness of someone who understands the wrong reaction will cause it to appear. She didn't say anything for Marisol, who said most things. This was the most significant thing she could have done. He reached down and held out his hand. She took it. He pulled her up. They stood in the kitchen, and curtain fabric draped over both their shoulders and broken lash pieces on the floor between them, and the evening light coming gold through the naked window frame. And neither of them said anything for a long moment, which was for both of them and for entirely different reason very unusual. I'll buy you a new curtain rod, she said finally. Her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it. It needed replacing anyway, he said. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent behind the mesa in the particular way it does in late May in that part of New Mexico. Slowly, expensively, spreading amber and rose and deep arterial red across a sky so wide it makes you feel both very small and, if you're lucky, somehow included in something much larger than yourself. Chow had gone back to sleep in the doorway, unseen, and the grey mirrors standing together at the far fence, their tails moving slowly. The air smelled of the juniper and the distinct possibility of the rain. Ahano stood in his kitchen with a curtain on his shoulder and felt something he had not felt in 3 years, 2 months, and all those uncounted days. He felt the present, like actually physically, undeniably present, not watching from behind the window, not going through the motions from somewhere far away inside himself. Here in this room, in this moment, in this specific, ridiculous, irrepressible situation, it was terrifying and it was wonderful and it felt some of like something true. He did not fall in love quickly. He was not built for quick. He was built for the long and the deep, for feelings that went all the way down to bedrock and stayed there. But the door once opened did not close again. He tried once or twice in the weeks that followed to push it shut, or reflex, or protection, and found that his completely wouldn't go. Something was in the way, something warm and aggravating and completely unwilling to be tie-dyed away. Marisol stayed in the area through the summer. She was a school teacher by profession on summer break and had decided that rebuilding her after nearly marrying the wrong man was going to require more time and space than her apartment in Albu- Albuquerque could offer. Her Aunt Rosa's small house 2 miles down the road became her base of operation. She filled it with the birds and plants and the sound of the radio and the smell of things cooking, and she showed up at a Hanno's place with the frequency and the casualness that suggested he had simply decided he was part of her regular route throughout the day. She broke three more things over the course of that summer: the handle of a second coffee pot, a different one, reaching for it with a characteristic velocity, a shelf bracket in the tack room that had been weakened by years and chose her presence at the moment to finally surrender, a glass jar of honey that she somehow contrived to drop in a way that distributed its consent, its contents, across a square footage that seemed to defy the basic physics of the container. Each time there was a moment of startled silence and then laughter hushed his following, growing each time a little less hesitant, a little less like a man surprised by his own capacity for it. She burned a pot of coffee so completely that the smell lasted in the house for 4 days. She once let both horses out of the paddock simultaneously by misunderstanding the double latch system and spent 45 minutes chasing them across the south pasture in her socks, narrating the entire experience at high volume in combination of English and Spanish, while Ahano followed at a deliberate pace, collecting the horse once one at a time with unhurried efficiency of a man who has herded animals in his entire life, watching her with an expression that his face was no longer able to fully suppers. He started talking more, not a dramatic transformation, not suddenly eloquent, not suddenly open in any grand confessional way. Just more words, more sentences, more moments of actual exchange rather than the polite deflection he had maintained for years. He told her about the horses, their histories and personalities. He told her about the saddle making, about the particular satisfaction of handwork that required the precision and patience. He told her one evening on the porch with the last light going about his grandfather, who had built his house and who had told about him. Once that the land in his part of the New Mexico, remember everything that had happened on it, and would tell you its stories if you were quiet enough and patient enough to listen. He listened to all of it with her whole face. That this was something he noticed about her. She listened with every part of her, not politely or performatively, but genuinely, her eyes absolutely on him, no part of her reaching for the next thing to say. It was, he thought, remarkable in a person who spoke as much as readily as she did. She could do both with equal completeness. He told her about Elena. One night in July, he had not spoken her name aloud to anyone over a year. He said it carefully, like something he was learning the weight of again, and Marisol did not reach for him or say something reassuring or do any of the things people do when they are uncomfortable with grief and trying to manage it back to a safe distance. She simply stayed exactly where she was, present and still, and let the name exist in the air between them until it had said what it needed to say. She sounded like she was extraordinary. Marisol said when she had finished. She was, he said. Good, she said, not performatively, not to fill the silence, just meaning it, as though the existence of Elena, even the memory, was a thing memory being glad about. He looked at her in the half dark of the porch and felt something clarify in him. Like the moment in the early morning when a shape that has been formless in the dark suddenly reveal itself to be exactly what it is. On the morning of the first frost, he took over to the grave. He had told no one about the dawn visits. He had brought anyone here. He had never brought anyone. It was the most private thing in him. The raw center of everything he carried. He woke that morning before the light and found her sitting on the porch steps with the two cups of coffee, her jacket half buttoned, her breath visible in the cold air, apparently just waiting without any particular justification. Cold morning, she said, handing him a cup. I go somewhere in the mornings, he said. He had never said this to anyone. I want to show you. She didn't ask questions, she just stood up. The graves were at the eastern edge of his land, where the red earth gave way to a swollen raw line with the pine and pine, and the first light always arrived there before it arrived anywhere else, collecting in the clearing like something intentional. Three stones, his own hands named, carved with the patience of a man who had nothing but the time and needed the work to hurt in a useful direction. He stood beside each stone and spoke the name loud, his father, his mother, Elena, three times. The silence after each name, and three times he felt this familiar compression in his chest. The grief that would never be entirely gone, that he had learned to carry the way you carry water in the desert, carefully without spilling, aware of it always. Marisol stood beside him. She did not speak. She did not reach for his hand. She stood with her coffee cup held in both hands and her eyes on the stones and her whole presence simply there, not trying to fix anything, not trying to fill anything, not performing grief or comfort or any of the things people perform at graves. Just there, just accompanying him into the most interior room of himself and standing quietly in it without trying to rearrange the furniture. When he was ready to leave, he turned. She turned with him on the path back through the pine and she caught her boot on the root. The same boot. He noted the muddy one from the water drove incident and stumbled forward, grabbed his arm, righted herself, let out of a breath. I did not. I did that on purpose, he said. He looked at her to lighten the mood. He said, "You have never done anything on purpose in your life," he said. She laughed, he laughed. The sound of it went up through the pine trees into the cold, clear morning air and disappeared into the sky, which was turning above the mesa. From the dark blue of early mornings into the extraordinary, saturated, impossible blue that only existed in the New Mexico in October. In the first clear light, he took her hand on the walk back and did not let go. He went back to the Alberic in the fall. School started in September and she was a teacher. She had obligations, a life, a class of the 22, 8 years old who were waiting for her with the furious need of children who have found a teacher that actually sees them. She packed her books and her plans and drove away down the dirt round road on a bright September morning. A Hannah stood at the gate and watched her go and felt the absence arrive immediately, sudden and specific, like a sound cutting off. But this was not the absence he had known before. This was not the cold hollow of the graves, the terrible permanent silence of people who would never come back. This was the absence of someone who was going somewhere and would return. Someone who's going create a specific shape of missing that was underneath its discomfort. Entirely different character from grief. It was a missing, a wanting, not of loss. He held those two things apart in his mind, examined the difference and understood for the first time that he knew what they felt like separately now. She called that night. Then the next night, the most night after that, long calls and hours sometimes to the same stream of consciousness commentary on the day that she delivered in the person, now delivered over the phone while he sat on the leaning porch in the dark with the stars during their particular extravagance above the mesa and Kyo and Chow warmed against his boot. He found himself looking to the calls to the late afternoon with the anticipation that was now and a little alarming, entirely welcoming. She drove out most weekends. Sometimes she stayed 2 days, sometimes three. She brought the groceries with increasing assertiveness. Fresh things, actual vegetables, items that require cooking rather than can opening, and took over his kitchen with a cheerful lack of permission that he had stopped objecting to sometime in August. She fixed the window latch properly on the second attempt, this time without incident, which she seemed personally disappointed by. She painted the porch railing one Saturday while he worked in the barn, and when he came out, she had paint on her cheek, her arm, both knees, and somehow the top of one ear, and the railing looked better than it had been in 15 years. The eldest noticed it was Mrs. Yellow Horse who said it first, and the fall council gathering in the specific tone of announcement that means everyone already knows but is waiting for someone to make it official. A Hanno running wolf is laughing again. It passed through the community the way certain kinds of news pass in whisper with a warm in them, people repeating it to each other, not as gossip, but as something they needed to say aloud in order to fully believe it was true. His cousin Marcus called and said, "I heard as thought it that was everything it was." It was on a January evening with snow and the mesa on the first time that winter on the fire in the old fireplace going in his crooked, smoky, contrary way. Marisol sat on the floor with her back against the couch and a book in her lap and her head on her foot reading and not talking, which he was capable of in concentrated stretches, and Hannah sat in the chair across from her, and she looked at the two of them and the firelight on her face and the snow beginning outside the window that let the let in the cool air, and felt the full weight of his life. All of it, the graves that had drawn, and the 3 years of silence, and the curtains on the kitchen floor, and the red velvet cake, and every cold morning and every warm evening since. Felt all of it as one completed a real thing, nothing cut away, nothing excluded the grief and the laughter, and the absence and the presence of all together. All is all true. This was not happiness that had replaced the sorrow. This was something larger, something contained both the kind of living that comes after you have been broken all the way and have discovered, surprising yourself, the breaking was not the kind of the end of the story. He was still a man who visited three graves at every dawn. He would always be that man. Grief does not end, and any story that tell you otherwise is telling you something. But grief can change its quality. From the kind that sees you shut to the kind that keeps you open. From the kind that makes the world feel absent to the kind that makes you feel every inch of it. Every cold morning and the warm fire and the clumsy, irreplaceable person on your floor with the dog on her foot. Marisol looked up from her book and found him looking at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. She studied his face for a moment with those dark, direct eyes that never missed much. You're smiling, she said. No, I'm not. Hanno, you're absolutely smiling. He could feel it, strange and a little unfamiliar on his face, like a muscle remembered after long disuse, like the creak of a door moving on hinges that has been still a long time. Go back to your book, he said. She grinned, the white and garden grin that he had come to understand was the most purely herself thing about her, and went back to her book, and Kyo's tail thumped once again against the floor without the rest of him moving, and the fire smoked in his wrong direction, and the snow fell on the mesa and the graves and the leaning porch and the red earth, and the horses stood back in the barn with their winter coats, and the night was cold and clear and full. His name was a Hanno running wolf, which means he laughed. It had taken 34 years, three graves, one gas can, a binder clip, a curtain rod, a red velvet cake, and the most genuinely accidental woman who had ever met. But the spirits, as it turned out, had always known exactly what they were doing. They had simply needed him to be ready, and now, slowly, imperfectly, completely, he was. There you go. Thank you.